And good evening, Aotearoa. Welcome to the Kiwi Fair Go Debate, where we will be putting the same questions to 13 out of the 16 political parties running in the 2017 election. We here at the Daily Blog passionately believe in our democracy, but also feel the mainstream media have done a shit job of giving all our political parties platform to put their ideas to you, the voter. It's only fair when every voice gets to be heard in a democracy, and the mainstream media's desire to narrow the focus to just 6 parties means that the full possibilities of MMP are never allowed to nurture new political movements and new political ideas. The mainstream networks say you can't make this type of event work. Well, tonight, fingers crossed on the technology, we're going to try and give you, the voter of New Zealand, the opportunity to see a far larger political spectrum than you've been offered. Tonight, we will hear from 13 of the 16 political parties standing in the 2017 election. The National Party and ACT were invited and refused to front, and the People's Party of Aotearoa, they just didn't manage to get back to us on time. Bless them. Follow the show tonight on Twitter using the hashtag Kiwi Fair Go, with our Twitter commentators, public broadcasting activist Joe Bond, Indigenous rights activist and environmentalist Non-Plastic Maori, and unionist and human rights activist Kate Davis. Tonight, I will interview Materia Ture from the Greens, Clyde Graff from Band 1080, Chris Leach from Democrats for Social Credit, Gareth Morgan from the Opportunities Party, Leighton Baker from the Conservative Party, Hone Harawira from the Mana Movement, Susie Dawson from the Internet Party, Marama Fox from the Maori Party, Tracy Martin from New Zealand First, David Haynes from the Outdoors Party, Mackie Herbert from the Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party, Ian Lees-Galloway from the Labour Party, and Ben Rickard from United Future. Joining me with their thoughts and their pick of the Twitter comments tonight are political commentators and Daily Blog bloggers Kerwin Rollinson, and fingers crossed at some point, LaQuisha Redfern. Kerwin, how are you?
Very good. Yourself?
Not too bad, my friend. What the hell is going on with the polls?
Well, let me put it this way. There's only one poll that obviously matters, and that's election day. But the trend which we've seen thus far has been very interesting because it's actually a close mirror for what happened in 2005. Then what happened was most people decided, hey, we might like some of the smaller parties, but we can't risk not putting our support behind one of the big two in order to get the government we want. Now, that's dangerous because we have MMP in the first place because we long ago learned we can't trust either of the big two parties to have untrammeled influence. So it's really great to have a debate like this so people can see there are some other options and to have their voice heard to potentially balance either Labour or National.
What do you think the issues are that are driving this election right now?
Well, at the moment, apart from Jacinda Mania versus the tired national government, I do think that there are some strong noises being heard about A, education policy, B, healthcare policy, as of course seen, and particularly when it comes to mental health, and C, law and order is also going along there in the background. But there's also D, fiscal management and taxation. Whether you believe that the National Party, which has imposed, 18 taxes over the last 9 years, is better or worse than the $11.5 billion fiscal hole, which the Labour Party is supposedly going to conjure from somewhere.
What do you think has been the worst political mistake so far?
Well, other than the National Party presuming that it was going to be fighting Andrew Little. I mean, see, that's the thing. Like, if you look at the National Party's branding and advertising, which they've unveiled over the last month, they had 3 years to get that ready. And all they did was run exactly the same campaign they ran in 2014, whereas Labour, they managed to pull out of a hat in about a week or thereabouts an entirely new campaign, which just absolutely blindsided them and is hammering them as far as possible. I mean, we're actually in a situation right now whereby some people are seriously predicting that Labour might actually manage to beat their 2002 high point. That's amazing. So the fact that National didn't anticipate this, well, I suppose you can't really blame them. But at the same time, I really am going to.
That $11.7 billion hole that Stephen Joyce was holding up for much of the election campaign and pointing to that as proof evidence that the Labour Party can't work out their account, that has just not one economist has supported Stephen Joyce on that. At what point do they start actually damaging the position of the government when they start coming up with silly, ludicrous lies as easily seen out as that one.
To be honest, with the National Party, silly, ludicrous lies, and I know they're not here to defend themselves, ironically perhaps, is their absolute bread and butter. I mean, when you get right down to it, Robert Muldoon once said that the average New Zealander wouldn't know a fiscal deficit if they tripped over one in the streets, and it's actually still quite true today. The average New Zealander probably doesn't really know or care too much about either side's comments about fiscal management. There's a general perception on a number of sort of fronts from many voters that the Labour Party can't run an economy, despite Michael Cullen doing a very successful job with that. And of course, the converse also being true with regard to the National Party. All you're doing when you sort of get up and say, hey, $11.7 billion hole is communicating, hey, those base perceptions you have are accurate and vindicated, never mind what the facts actually say. We are in a post-truth politics paradigm, and it's very unfortunate, but we just got to roll with it.
What are you looking forward to this evening?
Well, this evening, I'm looking forward to seeing how a number of the smaller parties are able to put across their case. We've already seen a Damien Light effect, so to speak. I'd be very pleased if tonight we could have some of the other parties step up and outperform United Future. I mean, it's kind of a curious thing, but I actually think United Future might be in a position to have their best result of the last 9 years.
That's a big call, mate. What are we to make of the number and level of early votes?
Oh, it's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, to be fair, there is a bit of a risk here because we generally assume, as left-wingers, I suppose I can say that high turnout is good. And historically, this has very much been the case. However, the difficulty is that if we look at the stats from the last election, what you actually saw was the early votes which were coming out tended to be disproportionately national as compared to what happened down the track. There is a bit of a risk. Risk is the wrong word. There is a possibility that with the increased early voting we're seeing, it's actually the result of people being terrified about Jacinda Mania and therefore moving to get in early, bring in their friends, because that's early voting works very effectively, to try and counter it. So we might be in for a very nasty is possibly also the wrong word, Nazi. There we go. A Nazi surprise on election night as a result of early voting.
Because that's what we saw in 2014, wasn't it? A lot of us commentators thought that the early numbers were suggesting that maybe that was a mood for change because of dirty politics. That's not how it turned out at all. And you were right. A lot of those early votes actually were middle-class voters saying, I don't care about the dirty politics. I want to make sure I get my untaxed capital gains, thank you, and make sure it's in the bank. The anecdotal evidence this time around, however, is that it seems to be a change vote.
Well, we can but hope in that sort of situation. Although the point I'd like to make about dirty politics and the capital gains tax is, first up, the way the New Zealand media worked on that, they jumped on it, absolutely jumped on it, and turned the National Party somehow, this massive billion-dollar organisation which has had incumbency for the previous 6 years, into some sort of outsider underdog. It's amazing how they managed to screw that up. But because New Zealand is like an underdog, they decided to back them as a result. But the capital gains tax policy, you point out, is very interesting and very sort of relevant. Because, David Longy back in 1986, a guy called De Kleen, who's now an ACT Party sort of person, was trying to get the Labour Party to adopt a capital gains tax policy. And David Longy said, if they want a second term, we should shut up about that. I'm going to open Lake Wakamana over it, so to speak, in terms of pouring cold water. The fact the Labour Party forgot about this and thought they could seriously try and run, some sort of fiscally responsible campaign by pushing a capital gains tax was dangerous and cost them a large proportion of their election result last time. This is why I'm so worried, because A, you had the Labour Party refuse to rule in or out a capital gains tax throughout a large portion of this year's campaign, and B, you have James Shaw jumping up and saying, hey man, we got to have a capital gains tax. I understand why he's doing it, but when your party is, down towards that 5% threshold, it's very risky to take that kind of stand on principle when predominantly, if you look at the Green Party support base, even though we like to think of them all as dope-smoking hippies, and I know we've got the ALCP on here, so we should give them a shout-out, but, their actual support base tends to be very well off and tends to actually own property, perhaps even investment property. Telling those people to vote against their own economic self-interest, sure, it might work, but it might also mean you shave off that extra 2% that could be the difference between life and death for you.
Kerwin, we will come back to you a little bit later on in the show. Thank you so much. And hopefully we'll be joined by LaQuisha St. Redfern as well. If you are at home and you're wanting to tweet out your thoughts, please do so. Hashtag Kiwi Fair Go. We will move right now to our first guest this evening, Materia Ture, former co-leader of the Green Party. Kia ora, Materia, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you guys doing?
Very well. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. Your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is important starts now.
The election is important because we can not just change the government, but we can create a good government, not just a different one, a good one that will end poverty. Now, I risked my whole career and put it on the line in order to end poverty in this country because I know that we can do it with a decent government. That's what we've got the choice to create at this election.
Let me start with my first question this evening to you, Materia. There are 41,000 homeless in New Zealand, with 1,600 dying each year from the cold, tens of thousands more living in overcrowded conditions, and hundreds of thousands locked out of home ownership. What will your party do about that?
Fix all of that. The first thing we have to do is we have to deal with poverty, because poverty is one of the drivers for a great number of those problems. It's not the only part, but it has to be dealt with. And that means increasing benefits, increasing low wages, fixing working for families, making sure that families have got enough money to be able to pay rent and put food on the table and live a decent life. We also need to have a very significant house building program in this country that government not just doesn't deliver on its own, because it can't and no government could, but that works in partnership with iwi organisations, with councils, with community organisations, actually drives the plan based on the human right of all New Zealanders to have decent shelter. Housing New Zealand needs a core responsibility to make sure that everybody is housed, and then works with all of the people and organisations that are possible to deliver that. That is the only way that we will deliver decent housing in this country. So one, we can fix income essentially in the first budget of the new government.
Materia,
dealing with housing will take a bit longer. Sorry, Dave.
Right. Are you saying then that our homelessness and the lack of affordable housing, but it's just a political decision? It's a decision not to hold those issues up as something that can be solved. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, totally it is. And there's a lot of National puts a lot of blame on the GFC for why for the housing crisis, but actually they had the opportunity with the global financial crisis to put a major investment into house building, because they knew then in 2009 that we had 20,000 people who were homeless in 2009, that we had 70,000 too few homes then for the population as it was then. And they could have, as part of supporting communities during the GFC, invested in training for people to be engaged in the building industry, to protect the forestry industry, to protect our timber companies, to actually have built those homes. And if they had done that investment then, we would not be in the situation we're in now. Officially,
there were 600 suicides last year. Critics say our real numbers could be 3 times higher than that official number. Why are New Zealanders killing themselves in such numbers? And what will your party do about that?
Despair, racism, transphobia, homophobia. I mean, these are all some of the drivers. These are all drivers of our high suicide rate. This dislocation that people have from their communities and from their families, and from the sense that they have any belonging or contribution to make here. This country doesn't keep numbers on the number of beneficiaries who commit suicide, but I know after telling my story that I've had lots and lots of mail from family members talking about the suicide of their kids, in particular, who were on benefits and just couldn't survive and couldn't cope. So, you can't just fix it in one go. We say provide free mental health counselling to all young people as of right, but there's a lot more we're going to have to do to invest in those families who are really suffering now to get over the hump. If we deal with poverty, if we deal with housing, make sure there's jobs, that's the long term, but we've got an immediate term urgent need for investment in mental health for everybody who needs it. They should be able to access it.
Is climate change the biggest issue facing us as a species, and what will your party do about it?
Yeah, I think it is actually. And I think we're seeing the effects of climate change in our weather patterns and the change all the time. We have to start treating climate change both as a serious issue, but also as an opportunity, because all of the means by which we will reduce our emissions and protect our communities are opportunities for 21st century technologies, sustainable technologies, new jobs, new business, new opportunities for all our people, particularly for our young. So if we treat climate change seriously and then invest in those sustainable technologies and those new ideas and new education for the 21st century, then we've got a real chance of being able to manage the effects of climate change and to reduce those impacts over time.
What is the biggest issue in health right now, and what will the Greens do about it?
So much of it is underfunded, but I think the mental health issue, actually mental health probably is, partly because actually if you invest right now, you can help fix that. People can be made well, can be led to wellness, I guess, if they have the right support at the right time. And so, mental health is just becoming so acute for people as they're suffering long-term poverty, long-term dislocation, long-term abuse, and that needs to be where I think we need to put a huge amount of resource right now.
Final question to you. What is the biggest issue in education right now, and what will the Greens do about it?
Well, one of our big priorities, and there's lots of big issues in education, is in Te Reo Māori. That if we're going to have a treaty-based nation, if we're going to have a truly bicultural nation, we need our kids, all of our kids, to know Te Reo Māori, and as part of that, tikanga Māori and New Zealand history, because we will never have a country that is safe for us all to be Pākehā and Māori in if we don't all understand where we come from, how we got here, and understand each other's language, our Indigenous language.
Thank you, Matera. You have 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote for the Green Party in the 2017 election? Your time starts now.
Look, it is the Green Party that will make sure Labour does the right thing in government, frankly. We know that there are big transformations we need in this country, and only the Greens will make sure Labour takes those important steps, doesn't just tinker around the edges, but actually does end poverty, does deal with climate change, does clean up our rivers. That's why we need the best possible vote for the Green Party at this election.
Materia, thank you so much. Many respects for everything you've done this campaign.
Kia ora.
Good luck. Hooray. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on now to our second party this evening, Clyde Graff, leader of the Ban 1080 party. Kia ora, Clyde, are you there? Clyde?
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is important starts now.
The Ban 1080 party was formed about 3 years ago, and this is our first full effort at campaigning. Currently, around $100 million is wasted on contaminating our environment, poisoning animals and allowing them to decompose in our forests and waterways, and further extending that poisoning cycle. The Ban 1080 party believes that this is unacceptable. It's not clean, it's not green, it's toxic, and we have better ways of managing our wildlife and our rural communities in regard to managing and undertaking our wild animal management, to use that word management over and over. But basically that's where we are. Thanks.
The Ban 1080 party is a one-issue party. Can you just give us a little bit more explanation as to why banning this poison is so important to you?
Well, personally, I've been involved with filming, documenting, researching the aerial 1080 drops across New Zealand for the last 11 years with my brother Steve. We produced over 22 documentaries and films on the issue.
Yeah.
So we've seen what's going on out in the forests. We understand exactly the problems and the issues that we see. There's so many things wrong with it. For example, animal welfare. Thousands of deer are poisoned every year. Hundreds of thousands of other animals, small animals, pigs, pets, people's pets all across the country, dogs, etc. The poison's extremely indiscriminate on how it works. At the current rates, and this has just been released, and I've only just picked up on it recently, and it's based on the government's well, the government owns the factory that imports the poison and distributes it into the bait forms. And this currently spreading at 2 million kilos, 2 million tons, 2 million kilos of 1080 bait across our forests and waterways. That's enough poison to kill over 50 million people every year. Now, we always believed it was around the $20 million mark, but the 20 million people mark. But that information now that we've got this last month shows that it's over 50 million. So with what that means, I don't know, but it's extremely toxic and it's going out into that environment. There is no antidote with 1080 poison, and it's also dropped directly across all the waterways at the same rate as the land areas. Now, for example, in the Hunua aerial poison drop, I have the flight charts, they're called toxin flight charts. They show exactly where the helicopters spread the poison, where they drop it. And as for the Hunuas, it went through all the waterways that feed into you Aucklanders' water supply, into those dams. The dams were excluded, but all the water that went in and all the forests were poisoned at the same rate as the land areas. So this is the sort of cavalier attitude with these poisoners, and it's the government agencies that are doing it. And you ask, well, why would they do that? Well, it's quite simple. It's a multi-million-dollar industry, and it's one that's actually building in force. For example, you've heard of the Predator-Free 2050 project, and that's going to mean more and more aerial poison drops all across New Zealand. And incidentally, the national government just this year took away the ability of aerial poison drops to go ahead without being subjected to the RMA regulations. In other words, they can just go ahead and do aerial drops wherever they like without public consultation, public feedback, and without having a resource consent to drop directly into the waterways.
Why do people vote so passionately for the 1080 party? I mean, as a political person, I've gone out and met many different types of people in different types of parties, but it's always struck me that 1080 people are very passionate and also quite angry about what they see as poisoning. What is it that drives your members?
It's a very, very good question, and there's a very, very good answer, and that is because these people are on the front line. It's people that are living on the farm edges. They've had their pets or stock poisoned. They've seen the deer come out onto their properties and die. They've had to write out or sign the confidentiality agreements to be paid out for their losses, etc. These are people that have lived in the forest. They've experienced the bush life. They love it. We all love the forest. We love our bird life, and we do love the deer as well. I don't mind saying it, but we are experienced in seeing what takes place in the forest, the things that people don't see when they're in the cities, that we see the baits in the waterways. We see the dead animals dying in the waterways and in the forests.
This is the thing I think that a lot of people don't appreciate or understand about the Ban 1080 party. You are very environmentally focused, aren't you?
Absolutely. Now, look, I would just like to. How much time have I got left? Because I could
we've got another minute, my friend.
Oh, okay. Well, look, here's the thing. Our latest policy is currently there's $100 million wasted, as I said earlier, contaminating our environment and poisoning animals in an inhumane way. The Ban 1080 party would like to see that money redirected into communities, rural communities, into training, into increasing track networks, into increasing backcountry accommodation. We want to employ people in the rural areas. We want to use humane, targeted pest, or we call it wild animal management, because in our opinion, they're just wild animals. Mm-hmm. We want to focus the attention where it's needed. However, another policy that we've got is that the national government, for example, has allocated $40 million into local pest control community stuff, right? They've promised 40 million. We'd like to see that 40 million redirected and put into a bounty. So we've got 100 million that's currently wasted on aerially poisoning and killing possums. Another 40 million that the government's now promising back to local pest control. We want that 40 million to go into a bounty, a $10 bounty per possum and a $25 bounty. This is for the first year, a trial, $25 bounty for every ferret mustelid. Now, the trappers, the guys out there, they can collect the possums, get the tail, get paid for the tail. They can use the byproduct for the fur industry, whatever they like, to help support their families, etc., in the rural areas. What you will see is, it'll be like a gold rush, in fact, as the possum and the stoat numbers go down, and this is targeted stuff. As they go down, we increase the bounty. We'll put it up to 50 or whatever it may cost.
Thank you, Clyde.
Thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it.
You've got 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote for the Ban 1080 Party this election?
Because we are genuine. We are dedicated to keeping our New Zealand environment, our forests, healthy, poison-free, and our rural communities working in a targeted way, in a way that we can stand up as a nation and say, we are proud to be New Zealanders. We actually look after our wildlife. We target the animals that we're after, and we don't kill the entire forest with deadly poisons. But thanks very much, and thanks for everyone out there listening. I appreciate it.
Have a great evening. Thank you so much. We are moving on to our third party, ladies and gentlemen. Chris Leach, the Deputy Leader of the Democrats for Social Credit. Kia ora, Chris, how are you?
Kia ora, Martyn. I'm very well, thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Pleasure having you on board this evening. Your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is important starts now.
Thank you very much. Well, the Democrats for Social Credit, of course, as a party, have been around since 1953, previously known just as Social Credit. And we've been innovators and forward thinkers, really, in terms of the policies that we've promoted. For instance, in 1973, we put up a paper called You and Your Environment, which talked about a lot of the environmental issues that are only now starting to be addressed. Of course, we were the first party to campaign to make New Zealand anti-nuclear or nuclear-free, and also we're the leaders in the campaign for proportional representation. So one of the key things now is a look at our economic system, which is really drowning under the weight of interest burden that is being piled on top of it. And we think that it's vitally important for New Zealand to have people in Parliament that can innovate, as we have done, in some of the areas that need to be looked at, apart from economics, things like climate change, the loss of jobs due to technology, new ways of people receiving an income because they won't be working the sort of hours that they have been traditionally.
There are over 10,000 New Zealanders in prison, tens of thousands more on electronic bail. Double bunking has seen more prison rapes. Private prisons have seen total breakdown of order, and the lack of genuine rehabilitation means we have prisoners released more damaged than when they went in. At what point do you think politicians should acknowledge that the get on tough crime bullshit just doesn't actually work?
Well, it's long past time that politicians acknowledge that, because the proof of it is in all of the things that you've actually talked about, where in fact we have prisons essentially being a factory or a school, if you like, for people to learn to become better criminals. And once they leave prison, there isn't the support for them to try and integrate them back into the community. In the process of them being in prison, they haven't had the education that so many of them need. And so we simply perpetuate a system where we need to keep on building more and more prisons.
How would you go about solving those issues?
Well, I think let me give you an example. The Howard League for Penal Reform, I think, do a fantastic job. For instance, where they have been putting prisoners in communication with retired teachers, where prisoners can gain an education, can gain language skills, because a lot of our people who are in prison don't have the ability, for instance, to get a passport or to even understand a tenancy agreement, because their literacy skills are so poor. They are also doing things like getting them driver's training so that they can get driver's licenses when they get out of prison, so that they're capable of being able to get a job and be able to travel to work and do that kind of thing. So that's a very good base to build on in terms of the type of things that need to be done.
What is the biggest issue in the economy right now, and what will your party do about that?
The biggest issue in the economy right now is that our productivity per capita, per person, hasn't increased at all over the last 10 years. And so that, coupled with the fact that the government, or the government sector actually, currently spends $6,000 million every year paying interest on money that government and local bodies have borrowed, where that money could be putting into health and into education and supporting people who are homeless, and so many of the other desperate needs that we've got in our country today.
What is the biggest issue in our society, in our culture right now, and what will your party do about that?
I think the biggest issue is that we have lost our sense of community. It seems to me, if I look back to 1984, 1985, when Roger Douglas and co got into power and instituted the neoliberal economic experiment that we're still suffering from, where things were supposed to trickle down to those at the bottom. What it has done is it's turned everybody into being more interested in themselves and how they can advance themselves and about money than it is about community and people.
What is the biggest domestic issue in New Zealand right now?
Domestic in terms of things that are happening in the country rather than internationally?
Yeah.
Well, I think there are two things, and I think Materia did refer to it quite well, and that is the level of poverty and homelessness, and that is a very, very serious issue, and it's really criminal, in a country like New Zealand that is so wealthy, that has so few people, has so much in the way of resources, that we have so many people who are homeless and so many people who are living below the poverty line.
What does your party want to do about that?
Well, I think one of the first things we have to do is we have to dramatically cut immigration until we can catch up with two essential things. Number one is providing enough housing for people, and number two is providing the infrastructure that we need to cater for the number of immigrants that we've had. I mean, you can't have 73,000 people a year coming in, which is a city the size of Rotorua or Whangarei, and not put in place the housing and the infrastructure for that. So one of the things that we would do is go back to look at what Michael Joseph Savage did in the first Labor government as the first Labor Prime Minister, along with John A. Lee, and that is they used the power of our Reserve Bank to provide the money necessary to build houses and to build roads and to build more infrastructure without having to pay massive interest rates on it the way that the government borrows these days.
Thank you, Chris. You have 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote for Democrats for social credit this election?
Well, I think it's vitally important that we have a party in Parliament that firstly are innovators, as I mentioned earlier, and in particularly in relation to the way our economic system works. Because if we continue with the type of economic basis on which we're working, where the economy is groaning under the weight of the interest bill, particularly that government and local bodies pay, we're not going to advance New Zealand at all. And we need to start doing things the way that both Japan and China do, in terms of using the power of their own central bank to provide finance to rebuild the country.
Thank you, Chris. Good luck for the election.
Thank you very much.
Our fourth party this evening is David Haynes, co-leader of the New Zealand Outdoors Party. Kia ora, David. Can you hear me?
Kia ora, Martyn. Can hear you loud and clear, thanks.
Your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is important starts now.
Well, thank you. Well, as Chris and Materia have said, we're all here because we think there are some important parts of New Zealand which we can make better. And a fundamental part of that is our environment, our outdoors, and our right to enjoy those. We think they're being chipped away bit by bit, and yet this is a fundamental part of the Kiwi way of life. To catch a feed, to go and shoot an animal, to put meat on the table. In fact, it's often the only way a lot of people can afford to put meat or fish on the table, get out there in the outdoors. So we want to preserve that, not only for now, but for future generations.
Is climate change the biggest issue facing us as a species? What does the New Zealand Outdoors Party think?
Well, look, I mean, I read a lot of books about it. I'm not an expert. I did 11 years research chemistry and science. I'm not an expert on it. I don't pretend to be an expert about that for 1 minute. It's not an area I profess to know enough about to give any valid comment on.
Would you see, though, that it maybe has had effect on the outdoors?
In my lifetime?
Yeah.
Well, I think climate change is measured in hundreds of years, isn't it?
What is the biggest issue in the economy, and what do you think the New Zealand Outdoors Party would do about it?
Well, I think as Materia and Chris inferred, that there's an imbalance, and I think New Zealand is moving away from what we believe is its traditional values, where you could go out, work hard, buy a house, put food on the table, put the kids up onto school, and enjoy the outdoors. And those are being eroded bit by bit. Things are being commoditized. Political parties are now talking about, in effect, commoditizing fresh water. We've got governments now looking at task force to stop public roads, unformed public roads. We've got a government that's trading conservation land for economic developments like Ruataniwha. We've got a lot of sort of advocacy groups calling our game animals pests, when to all of our members and supporters, they're valuable game animals that are a huge economic benefit. These sort of touchstones for New Zealand, we're losing them. And I think we're underselling ourselves.
Do you think tourism, that we're seeing some negative side to tourism with the kind of pressures being placed on the outdoors, particularly with infrastructure to be able to allow those tourists and then those numbers to move around? We've got, I understand, 4 million tourists looking to visit New Zealand next year. At what point do you say it's just too much?
Absolutely. Agree with you. The Tourism Industry Association at their annual do in the winter, beginning of the winter, identified a 6% growth from now till 2025. Now, they did say they'd like to see that more value than volume, but there's no substance to sort of enable that.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. So far, most parties have said, oh, look, we'll just put a tax at the door when they come in. Well, that's great for the coffers. It does nothing for this sense that some outdoors people, particularly tramping groups, are being displaced from the outdoors. So we are, as far as I'm aware, the only party who are saying something quite tough, which is maybe we should have quotas on tourists in some areas. They already in Yosemite in the USA, they have it in Colorado. We have it on our great walks, in effect. So the Milford Track, it'll take you 2 years to get on there. We can extend that, and that's how you raise the value game instead of charging $20 for everybody and just continuing to milk the volume game.
What is the biggest issue in our society and culture right now?
I think, as I said earlier, Martyn, that we're losing those fundamental Kiwi touchstones of going out in the outdoors and enjoying our backcountry. Hey, look, because of spent a bit of time in and out of hospital with some friends at the moment, and all of the doctors I spoke to, I must say there's a lot of English doctors out there, and so I'm naturally curious to ask what brings them here. And they all say, I could have got better weather in Australia, I could have got more money in America or in the UK, but I came here because of the outdoors, because I love hunting, because I love fishing, because I love tramping, because I like to go and catch a snapper. That is what we are losing.
What is the biggest domestic issue in New Zealand right now? Do you think it's water?
Yeah, fresh water. It's head and shoulders above everything else. We've seen its decline. We've seen this appalling fuel, tailed mouse versus country mouse bullshit argument that's going on that does nothing to help. There's a whole raft of supermarket science going on about picking which bits of data support the other parties. And meanwhile, we've lost our taonga, our most treasured asset. Without fresh water, we have absolutely nothing. I think it's head and shoulders our most important issue. And I think taxing for it, charging royalties for it is the thin end of the wedge to commoditization and tradable asset. And that will go straight offshore along with all our other assets. What
does the New Zealand Outdoors Party want to do with water?
With fresh water, we want to stop Crown irrigation investments. Of the $540 million that's been assigned to it, only 2% of that has actually built any irrigation schemes. So if we carry on exactly as we're going now, we'll get 50 times more pollution. We want to stop damming diversion modification, whether it's gravel extraction, cross-blading, rivers. We want to stop that. We don't want to charge it for it. We think it belongs to everybody. We think we need to protect it. Future generations, we think there's far better ways of doing it than just sucking it out and replacing it with sewage.
Thank you, David. You have 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote for the New Zealand Outdoors Party this election? Your time starts now.
Thank you, Martyn. Well, thank you for listening to us. We have 700,000 sea fishermen out there. We have 120,000 freshwater anglers, 300,000 trampers, 34,000 duck shooters, 242,000 licensed firearm owners. We represent all the collective interests of over 1.3 million outdoors people in New Zealand. What we've got is precious, it's unique. We should protect it for now. We should protect it for future generations. We're the only party that collectively values and cherishes and promotes our outdoor way of life and its environment.
Thank you so much. Have a great election. Thank you. Good luck. Moving on to our fifth party this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Maki Herbert, leader of the Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party. Kia ora, Maki. Are you there?
Kia ora.
How are you?
Good, thanks, mate. Yeah, we're here.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Now, let's kick into our first question for you. There are 41,000 homeless in New Zealand, with 1,600 dying each year from the cold, tens of thousands more living in overcrowded conditions, and hundreds of thousands locked out of home ownership. What will the Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party do for them?
We are endorsing the hemp industry. We know that if we had people with their own land, a hectare of land grows one 3-bedroom house. So it takes 120 days to grow hemp. So that's 3 crops a year. That's 3 homes on 1 hectare of land. And so if everybody got behind the hemp industry and grew hemp, we'd have a surplus of all sorts of products that can be made into. For example, biofuel. Of course, you know the hemp seed is really good for omegas 3, 6 and 9. But I'll get back to the housing. Yeah, I think that the housing problem can be solved with the hemp industry.
One of the truly perverse outcomes of making cannabis illegal is the throwing people into prisons. We've seen almost 6,500 New Zealanders arrested every year. That number still hasn't come down. The hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars spent on keeping them locked up in prison. Why is it that we cannot make any real, genuine political movement on deregulating or regulating cannabis in this country? Why?
It's called the willingness of the government. If they're not willing to be open-minded, take into consideration the Commission report, the Health Commission report in 2011 that recommended that cannabis become a health issue and not a criminal issue. I'm sure that will go a long way if we implemented some of the recommendations that the Commission recommended.
One of the perverse outcomes, another perverse outcome, of course, is this sudden rise in synthetic cannabis. Doesn't that just tell you everything that's wrong with the current system, where a synthetic version of a drug which doesn't kill people is actually being promoted because we won't legalize cannabis?
Absolutely, and we need to be renaming it as what it really is, synthetic poison. It has nothing to do with cannabis, and honestly, it's the one thing that really pisses me off about media. 1 minute they're talking about cannabis, and then next minute they're demonizing it with synthetic cannabis. And I find that really insulting to the cannabis plant itself, because as we know, it has that health aspect to it, like for medicine. We want to free the plant for those ones that choose to be organic. You know, we're not saying that that's the recipe for everybody. Sure, there's going to be still people that want to go to the doctor and have the prescription surgical pharmacy drug, because in their mind, that's what the doctor's going to give them. But we know for millions of years that the herb cannabis has been medicinal.
We, I think, have had 20 synthetic poison deaths this year alone. I was searching through coroner reports. I can't find one cannabis overdose in New Zealand's history.
Well, that's right. And because you know why? Because nobody's died from cannabis overuse. Nobody. If anybody's going to be using cannabis to the extreme of abuse, the only thing that's really going to happen to them is that they're going to get the munchies and go to bed and go to sleep and wake up like, oh, gee, well, I haven't got a hangover.
What sort of economic impact would regulating the cannabis market have for New Zealand?
Oh, millions and millions of dollars, billions of dollars would be coming into the economy. You know, I mean, the government spends $400 million a year on prohibition. And as we know, since prohibition started, if it was working, it would be working, but it's not. We still have hundreds of people using cannabis for one way or another, whether it be for recreational, spiritual, or for medicinal.
One of the great disgraces I feel that I witnessed in my time as a New Zealander was watching someone like Helen Kelly, who was a genuine people's hero, I believe, and who always went the extra mile for her fellow New Zealanders, watching her have to die as a criminal because she was unable to get the medicine that she required that would alleviate her pain. Why has it taken so long for medicinal cannabis to have its moment?
Well, that's the question we get asked all the time. And I just take it back to the willingness of the government. And obviously they haven't got the willingness to see the truth. It's called ignorance. Our government has been full of ignorance by choice. There's no more excuses. We had the excuses up over our heads now. It's time for change. It's time for stop making us criminals.
How is it that we, little old New Zealand, is so far behind everybody else on this page globally? I mean, the United States of America, the home of the war on drugs, is now far more liberal and far more progressive than little old New Zealand. How has that happened?
Well, it just comes back to our governments again. Hundreds of thousands of us know the truth. And like you say, America has shown the way from prohibition to legalization. They've put in the policies, they're making the policies work, they're tweaking the policies where they need to. Crime has come down, people have got hope. And so that in itself, when people have got hope, the poverty is decreased, people have got employment, people have got enough money in their pocket to go and put real food on their table. There's money in the pocket to clothe the kids, and this is where hemp comes into as well. You know, there's so many products that can be made to make us healthy again.
Thank you, Mackie. You have 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party this election?
Well, if you're okay about the present government wanting to make you a criminal, well, you go and vote for them. Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party has been around for 21 years advocating for law reform. That's why you should vote for us.
Kia ora. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Kia ora.
Ladies and gentlemen, our sixth party this evening, Leighton Baker, leader of the Conservative Party. Leighton, are you there?
I am. Thanks, Martyn.
Kia ora. Your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is important starts now.
Oh, look, every election's important because you get one chance every 3 years to influence the government. We would like to see that increased. We would like to see binding citizens' referenda become policy so that New Zealanders can actually influence government within that 3-year period. We think New Zealanders should have the right to choose things like, do we legalise assisted suicide? Do we legalise cannabis? These big issues should be chosen by all New Zealanders, not just a few MPs. I think the conscience vote has actually hijacked democracy. It hasn't done anything to prove it real. So we really believe that binding referenda is really important for New Zealand. And with it, we could probably stretch our national term out to 4 or 5 years. I guess the other really big thing for the Conservative Party is relationship training for young people so they learn how to build, develop and maintain healthy relationships. We believe they'll bring a drop down in abuse and substance abuse and crime and in suicide. So we believe it's a really key things.
Let's get into the suicide straight off the bat then Leighton. Officially, there were 600 suicides last year. Critics say our real numbers could be 3 times higher than that official number. Why are New Zealanders killing themselves in such numbers? And what does the Conservative Party put forward as a solution to that?
Yeah, there's no one fix. I think everyone acknowledges that. But the cause of suicide, there's a lot of different reasons, but a lot of it is a lack of hope and then disconnect. People disconnect from relationships, from family, even from land. People get disconnected in hopelessness and they have no reason to live, and that's tragic. And you know, most of us know someone who has taken their own lives, and it's a tragedy in every single way. So there's a few things we'd like to do as a party. One I've just spoken about is relationship training. You know, I'm a builder. When I get a young guy who wants to do an apprenticeship, I don't just give him a hammer and a set of plans and say build a house. We train him for 4 years to give him the skills, you know, and on goes for the rest of his life. But with relationships, we don't seem to really input and train people how to build and develop and maintain healthy relationships, how to communicate properly, how to hear how different people speak. And then people feel isolated, they can't verbalise what they're feeling and become suicidal. So we think actually that training would help drop the suicide rates there. I think another problem we have is we medicinally treat a lot of people who have a mental illness. And sometimes that's really important, but other times all it does is suppress. They're not actually heard. And so we really need to hear what people are feeling. We need to hear what people are struggling with so we can deal with it. If we just suppress it with drugs, either they overdose on the drugs or they go on off the drugs and have a terrible outcome that way. So yeah, those are two things we really think are important.
There are over 10,000 New Zealanders in prison, tens of thousands more on electronic bail. Double bunking has seen more prison rapes. Private prisons have seen total breakdown of order. And the lack of genuine rehabilitation means we have prisoners released who are far more damaged coming out of prison than when they went into prison. Get tough on crime is a popular political rhetoric, but the reality is locking people up in tougher and tougher conditions for longer periods of time, it's not working. What does your party suggest?
Yeah, you're quite right, it doesn't work. And I believe our prevention policy and crime policy is actually really solid. Schools are actually the one government organisation that will reduce crime the most, because if you can keep young people engaged in education, they're less likely to get involved in crime. So we would like to see trades training brought in at year 9s. So those young people who are hands-on learners stay involved in education. You can use the trades training to teach them their literacy and numeracy and everything else, but they're actually engaged in education, and that's the key part of it. Prevention is always better than cure. We've also got a youth crime policy, but I won't go into that one. If we move straight into what's happening in prisons, it really is, we've got a 3-stage sentencing program we'd like to bring in. So every prisoner gets sentenced, and 3 things they've got to do. The first, they've got to be engaged in work in prison. And being engaged is not just, I'm not going to do it. They actually have to be engaged and willing to be engaged. And once they've done that part, then they move into education. So every prisoner gets their own education profile put up for them. So there's a lot of fetal alcohol syndrome prisoners in there. And so basic numeracy, basic literacy for those guys. But other guys that haven't got those issues, you set the bar higher for them. And every prisoner must reach the education goals that have been set for them before they move to stage 3. Stage 3 is actually more of an open prison. So those prisoners that are engaged in work, they've done their education, then they get to go out and work. Now, we do have some programs working for prisons now, but the difference one here is they go out, they work outside of the prison, and they come back into the prison at nights. Their funds come back to the prison to pay their board. As time goes on when they're working for the release thing here, they get weekends away with their family, they might get week holiday away with their family. They're actually integrated into society slowly and properly. They're working with other people who are not inmates. They are seeing funds, they're getting some budgeting advice, they're talking to people outside, they're increasing their skills, they've got an education. Then the step to release is only a small step, it's not a huge leap as it is now. Like prisoners now, basically, if they finish their time without engaging in any way, they're open and they're let out, and that's the crime. We actually need to get them to engage. If they don't engage, they don't get out. It's their choice. We make them responsible for their outcomes.
Some very valid points there, Leighton. What is the biggest issue in health right now, and what will the Conservatives do about it?
Oh, the biggest issue in health is mental health, really, because it affects so many other things. I mean, your mental health actually affects your physical health. And mental health, people who are struggling with mental health, it vastly affects their families as well as society as a whole. So really, that's one big issue we have to deal with as a community. I agree with providing a lot more counselling services, so we're actually hearing people's problems and dealing with them. And this relational training thing, I come harping back to it, so I don't mean to be a stuck record, but it's so important. All of us are surrounded by relationships, work, family, mates, everything. We just need better skills to deal with them, and we can actually hear what people are saying ourselves.
What's the biggest issue in education right now?
Education is actually lifelong learning. I actually think we need to encourage people to get involved in trades training. And one reason for that is we actually always are going to need trades. We're talking about in the next 15 years, we're losing 40% of our jobs, but actually we're still going to need sparkies and plumbers and drain layers and builders, because those jobs can't be done by robots at the moment, and they won't really for a long time because of our existing housing stock. The other thing with that is you can actually do really well as a tradesman. You don't have to go to university to make an extra fortune. You can do well as a tradesman. We need to tell people you can actually do well in this job. And we grab them early, like I said, year 9. We give them some skills. We tell them you're useful. I spent 6.5 years as a tutor with young guys who were dropping out of school. So they were told they were dumb. They were told they were useless. They were basically only going to school 1 day a week if they wanted to. We just took them on board. We gave them some trade skills. And those guys, they went skyrockets. I see them now. They run their own businesses. Some of them have been on the Apprentice of the Year Challenge. Most of them didn't go into building, but they just arranged. They've got hope. And we said you're useful. And I think that's really important for us as a nation. We need to look forward, If 40% of our jobs are going to be on in 15 years, what are we going to be doing in 15 years? How are we going to train the 750,000 odd people who in 15 years have to do something else, So I think there is very much a room here for a long-term strategy. Across party, long-term strategy is what does New Zealand look like in 15 years?
Thank you, Leighton. You have 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote for the Conservative Party this election?
Look, firstly, I want to say thank you so much for hosting this event. It's been awesome. Thank you for everyone who's listened. For us, the big thing is democracy and family. If those are big things for you, although they're key points for you this election, then you need to vote for the Conservative Party, because they're the things that we really care about and our policies address. We're a practical, solution-based party. You can see that on our website, their policies, www.conservativeparty.org.nz. Have a look at them. But the big thing, get out and vote and make a difference to New Zealand this year. Remember, the only wasted vote is when you vote for something you don't truly believe in, because then if you even get what you voted for, it's not what you really wanted. Thanks very much.
Leighton, thank you. Good luck for the election. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is pretty much halfway through for this evening. Joining me now, Kerwin Rollinson and hopefully LaQuisha St. Redfern. Folks, are we on? Kerwin?
Yep. Okay, the first thing I'm going to say here is I've been absolutely blown away by some of the caliber of responses we've heard from pretty much every party this evening. I went into this, I must admit, with a few preconceptions about some of them, but I've come out going, okay, there are some meaningful contributions everyone can make. I'd like to make a particular shout out here for the Conservative Party. Now, I really did not like the Conservative Party under Colin Craig. I'm pretty iffy about some of the stuff which these guys are running here in Epsom about, abortion and euthanasia. But a lot of what Leighton Baker's been saying actually does make a surprising amount of sense. I never thought these words would leave my mouth, but I found myself sitting through his commentary on prison policy and going, that makes sense. I could actually see myself voting for that. Not the rest of it, you understand, but that was pretty cool. The other thing I'd like to call up is the Democrats' social credit. Absolutely. Anytime somebody says John A. Lee, my ears go up and I go, yes, somebody gets it. Somebody's got this alternative idea of how we can fix the economic problems in New Zealand. Brilliant stuff there. I also like the fact they mentioned Japanese quantitative easing, I believe that's the policy, as a potential alternative to the way we do things at the moment. I was actually kind of underwhelmed to a certain extent by the way Materia Turai did things, and that's no disrespect to her, but it came across as somebody who was, very professional, very sort of, well-versed in doing interviews, and therefore ran through a whole lot of stuff without necessarily sort of, putting anything to particularly grab me. But hey, maybe that's because I'm so used to seeing her doing such a brilliant job. Maybe that's why I didn't necessarily pick up on anything particularly brilliant. Having said that, with regard to the Ban 1080 sort of people, I'd just like to point out the policy they have with regard to putting out a bounty on possums rather than just sort of air deploying, 1080 everywhere.
Yep.
It's actually been New Zealand First policy for the last, I think, about 5 years or thereabouts, thanks to my good process. So just need to sort of put that in there. I'm sure Trace will also point that out later on.
What were your thoughts on David Haynes and Mackie Herbert?
Yeah, with regard to Haynes, now he's the outdoor recreation guy. So not outdoor recreation, sorry. I did check with Twitter. It turns out they're not actually a successor party to the outdoor recreation party which folded into United Futures, just in case. I was pleasantly surprised about that. I mean, I thought once again that it was going to be somebody potentially of a redneck inclination, no offense to him. He came across as pretty insightful about some matters of environmental policy. I was pretty pleased about that. Although I would note that when he talked about a opposition to the commodification of water, which I took to be in opposition to the Labour Party's water tax policy, he then also stated, and I quite agree with this, in opposition to the way the government's been doing irrigation, I thought there was potentially a bit of a contradiction there, considering that the intent of the water policy Labour's advancing is actually to try and tramp down on something which he also opposes. But having said that, he's he did a good job with regard to what he was saying in many parts of it. I liked the way we've Tauanga and concepts like that, and the notion of collective communal ownership and responsibility for our most precious resource, which is of course our natural environment. Now, Mackie Herbert, I've got to say, I've met her in person. She's a lovely person, and for obvious reasons, we have some bonds of solidarity. I wasn't actually that impressed by some of the things she had to say. I'm really sad about that because I want to like the ALCP for obvious reasons. I don't smoke anymore, just in case anybody's wondering. But I do have to sort of I saw the TV advert this afternoon and it came across pretty well. I mean, I was going, okay, yep, sure, hemp seeds is a nutritional supplement. Yeah, sure, I like that. But the problem is you can't really get up and say hemp is the answer to everything. I know it's a wonderful, sort of building material in some parts of the world. I know you can do some interesting stuff with cannabis, which is a different plant, let's remember. But at the same time, I do think that people want a bit more of a broad policy from the ALCP. And potentially at the same time, I do also think that they want a slightly more concisely sort of phrased approach to things. I mean, when you get right down to it, I do think that there is a very strong appetite out there in the community for, talking about law reform of cannabis. I mean, that's another thing which is amazing about the Conservative Party when it happens, is because they literally talked about having a referendum on cannabis legalization. I was going, it's such a popular thing, even the Conservatives are on the bandwagon. But having said that, she was absolutely correct with what she said about synthetic cannabis not being cannabis. That's a very good point which must be made. Although I'd also like to point out that, I'm not entirely sure if cannabis has had medicinal value for millions of years, although definitely it's been in use for quite a long period of time. And B, I don't think there's been any reported New Zealand overdoses on cannabis. It is actually possible to kill yourself on cannabis, except it's just very, very, very rare. I mean, it's a minor scientific quibble, but with particular cardiac conditions and the occasional risk of somebody having a suicidal ideation bout on psychosis, it does need to be part of the conversation that, occasionally there are some risks associated with consumption. Having said that, one thing I was very pleased about her raising was the the difference between whole plant cannabis as a medicine, whether it's homegrown or grown by your mate or whatever, depending upon your source, of course, but also that some patients will choose, whether because they can't grow it or other reasons, to go with the plant extract formulations prescribed for them by their doctor. So I'm very pleased with regard to the ALCP that recognise a diversity of options when it comes to medicinal cannabis. I'm also ever enthused about the originality with which they try to work cannabis and hemp into pretty much every policy problem you pose. However, at the same time, I do think they need to do a bit of a better job in terms of putting out key points across a broader range of policy.
I thought it was interesting. The New Zealand Outdoors Party was actually very focused on lowering the tourism numbers.
Well, it does actually make sense. I mean, to take things off, I suppose, the great outdoors for a moment. I remember as a much younger person going through Italy as a, I think about 17, and I was going through these big as impressive classical monuments. And while I was admiring the lovely marble architecture and whatnot, I couldn't help but notice the fact that I was wading through what were effectively drifts of cigarette butts. This, of course, being Italy, they're great smokers of all that sort of plants, so to speak. Now, in New Zealand, we have a similar problem around many of our, our great areas of natural beauty. Whether it's people being sort of, there in huge amounts, so you can't really sort of enjoy the serenity of the whole thing, or whether it's people littering, or as we've seen increasingly, tourists and backpackers who for some strange reason think that defecating or emptying their caravan toilets out into our waterways is a great thing to do. There is a serious problem with regard to people who come here, not all people, of course, mistreating or despoiling the natural beauty they've come here to see. So I think it's a very logical thing for the Outdoors Party to actually be talking about this. There is obviously a balancing issue to be had here in terms of the export income to be derived from tourism in the first place. But hey, if they've decided that they want to protect our natural environment and protect the accession of, to our natural environment for ordinary New Zealanders, then I can completely understand why they've got that.
It's also interesting to see that there's starting to be a backlash. Joe, you were on the Twitter panel. What were your thoughts of the first set of guests?
I thought it was absolutely fantastic, but I'm appalled that we spent $100 million poisoning animals with 1080. I had no idea that it was that much.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, isn't it?
Yeah.
What were your highlights so far, Joe?
It probably was a 1080 talk. I would add also that there were accusations that some traces of 1080 could have been in a Hanua water catchment, which actually feeds Auckland, and tiny traces of it could be in our water supply.
It was certainly interesting in terms of how passionate I've always found 1080 people to be. LaQuisha, you're with us now. Good evening to you. What were your highlights from the first candidates?
I thought that the New Zealand Outdoor Party guy looked like a really good provider. I was a little bit surprised, though, because there was a real colonial flavour to what he was saying when he was
Wasn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, like they're not pests, they're hunting. I'm like, yeah, guy, that's how we ended up with gorse and rabbits. This is like not awesome. I'm not down with that. But I like the idea about quota for tourists. And I think one of the other panelists was just saying, because I have a personal kind of rage out about freedom campers, because I'm like, okay, free love kids, but who's paying for the toilets? I'm like, you're a stupid whore if you're giving it away for free. We need to be charging for that. We need to be charging for it. And I want to go down with my little invoice thing and just give them invoices, but that would be fraud, and that's illegal. I find it surprising that we call it synthetic cannabis. It has no chemical relationship to THC whatsoever. That is some marketing BS by the synthetic cannabis manufacturers. I thought the Conservative Party guy was talking a lot of sense, but then I saw on Twitter that they don't really love the gays so much.
Not love the gays. They seem to be a bit shy, a bit standoffish.
Yeah, but I mean, like that aside, teaching people communication skills and having more trades type education, like I was really agreeing with it, but there was just that one little teeny tiny thing that means that I'm not going to be ticking no box with that words on it. Yeah, so those were kind of my my thoughts on the guests. Yes.
Thank you so much, panel. We will come back to you in just a moment. We're going to move things on now with Ben Rickards, the deputy leader from the United Future Party. Good evening, Ben. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well. Thank you, Martyn.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure. Can you see me, or do I need to turn my video on?
You'll need to turn your video on.
There I am.
Excellent. Your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is important starts now.
Okay, well, I think there's two really important points. The first one is that we're in danger of losing some really diverse perspectives in Parliament, with some of the minor parties really under threat. United Future being an obvious one, but the Greens are only polling around that 5%. So we're in danger of potentially losing their perspective. ACT's only in there on the back of an electorate deal. The Maori Party may only get back in on the back of Maori electorates. So we're tending back, unfortunately, towards a pre-MP environment, and that's really dangerous because we are a really diverse country, and we need that diversity of views to be represented in Parliament. And the second point is around, everybody's talking about the future with all of their slogans, but they're really only talking about solving today's problems. Nobody's talking about solving problems that we can see on the horizon that are going to affect future generations, but nobody wants to address problems that haven't quite become acute yet. So we're talking about housing crisis. We're talking about crisis this and crisis that. We should be looking for 10 or 20 years and saying, what are the issues coming down the pipe that we can address now and avoid those problems becoming a crisis?
Let's get into the questions. Officially, there were 600 suicides last year. Critics say our real numbers could be 3 times higher than that official figure. Why are New Zealanders killing themselves in the numbers they are, Ben? And what would your party do about that?
I mean, there's a whole range of reasons for it. I think 2 that spring to mind for me are the financial pressure that families feel. So I think that financial pressure is at the root of a lot of this. We know that there's suicides on farms
Yes.
because those guys are struggling. We know that suicide's prevalent in other families because they're not earning a decent wage. That financial pressure flows right through. And the second is around for younger generations. I believe it's around social media, the pressure that's putting on.
Okay.
And a whole bunch of other things that are putting pressure on our youth that we're not enabling them to address.
There are 41,000 homeless in New Zealand, with 1,600 dying each year from the cold, tens of thousands more living in overcrowded conditions, and hundreds of thousands locked out of home ownership. What is United Future going to do about that?
So around housing, we believe that a rent-to-own approach is a practical, common-sense way to address this. Mm-hmm. So we would allocate part of the government's home building program to a rent-to-own scheme where you don't need to have the deposit. You go in on a rent basis, but a proportion of that rent is set aside and it accumulates towards a deposit. And once you hit that threshold, then you can use that money to buy into your home. So that's going to address the home ownership side. But fundamentally, there's a lack of supply if people are homeless, and that's driving up prices. So we need to address the supply side as well.
Is climate change the biggest issue facing us as a species? What are you guys going to do about it?
Climate change is a big deal. It's one of our top priorities. And again, it goes to our view that we have to be addressing the problems that are coming down the pipe for future generations before they become too acute. So, we believe that there's got to be a tax on pollution, whether that's a carbon tax or whether that's an ETS. We are firmly in the view that, whatever works, what's the evidence suggests is the best way to address this problem, and that's the route that we'll take.
What's the biggest issue in our economy right now?
We're not necessarily looking at the issues right now. We're looking at the issues coming down the pipe. We're going to be a support partner to government. They can focus on the issue right now. We want to be saying, hey, guys, that's all very well. But what are the issues coming down the pipe? So in terms of the economy, let me just focus on that. Yep. the future of work is a big issue. We've got technology that's absolutely revolutionising the jobs. You know, that it's destroying jobs around the world. You know, you look at driverless cars, you look at artificial intelligence and the way that's taking over service industry. You know, that's just, we don't know what job's going to be available for when my kids come out of school. And so we need to be addressing those questions. The economy now, you know, will take care of itself. The economy in 10 or 20 years is going to be completely different. And that's what we need to be planning for.
What are the big issues in health right now?
Mental health.
Yep.
Mental health for, in particular, youth. Now, right across the age spectrum, but particularly mental health for youth. There's increasing understanding and acceptance, but you know, there's a big change in perspective at the moment. It used to be that we don't talk about suicide. We don't talk about that because you're bringing it out into the open and you'll get copycat. Now there's a voice saying, actually, we do need to bring it out in the open. We need to talk about it. You know, social media, there's studies saying social media increases people's levels of depression, anxiety, and stress. So, you know, we need to be focusing on that.
What do you think are the biggest issues in society and culture right now?
I think it is around social media, because again, for youth, that is something that our generation never had to deal with. You know, we're dealing with it now, but we're mature enough that we can sort of put that in perspective. Those guys are getting onto social media platforms, you know, at age 7, 8, 9, 10. They're not mature enough to be able to deal with that. And those pressures, you know, are too great for them to deal with at that young age.
What do you, what does United Future see as the big domestic issue in New Zealand right now?
I believe it's the future of work. So it's no one in this election has been talking about how technology is absolutely revolutionising economies, revolutionising jobs, the job market. That is going to, you know, my kids, I've got young kids. By the time they come out of school, the work, the jobs that they'll have available to them will be completely different from the ones that are available now. So that is what we need to be looking at. What skills should we be teaching our kids, or should they be learning that they're going to be able to use to earn an income in the future?
Final question: what's the biggest international issue for New Zealand right now?
I believe that it's trade, open trade. Now having the barriers that, you know, we see things like Brexit, things like what Trump are talking about, and increasing those barriers for trade. You know, we're a trading nation. We need to be exporting our goods and services around the world, and those barriers are really something that is going to affect us as an economy. So we need, you know, that sort of protectionism and isolationism is something that we really need to address.
Thank you, Ben. You have 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote for the United Future Party this election?
Well, my message really is that future generations of New Zealanders need a voice in Parliament. You know, we need to be thinking 10 or 20 years ahead. And so we need a policy where government, ministries, departments are saying, well, if we're going to implement a new policy here, what effect is that going to have, not just on a 3-year election cycle, but in 10 and 20 years, so that we're not storing up these problems for the future. So, you know, it's in our name, but that's very much our focus. And so people who believe in that need to put their vote with United Future.
Good luck and thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck for the election. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Ben from United Future, Deputy Leader there. We now move on to our next co-leader. It is Marama Fox, co-leader from the Maori Party. Kia ora, Marama, how are you?
Very good. Can you hear me and see me?
I can hear you, and for some reason you're on your side, but we'll
hold up. Hold on.
Here we go. Perfect. Your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is important starts now.
This election has come down to two parties and who's going to rule. They are very close right now, but what the public need to know is it's not going to come down to Winston's 10 seats. It's going to come down to the Maori Party's 3 or 4 seats plus a hone harawira in the north, if the north are smart enough to vote hone in. That's two guaranteed Ngāpuhi warriors sitting on the front benches of Parliament, and his seat will be pivotal into making up the new government. I know that if National come and knock on our door and need our seats, they'll be there. If Labour need our seats, they'll be there, and our membership will make the decision.
Māori voters could have more say in this election and the final outcome than any other election before it. What is on the line for Māoridom right now?
What's on the line for Māoridom is not wasting the Māori seats. Those seats were put there by our tūpuna and fought for to keep for representative voice in Parliament, not to be wasted on yes men inside a Pākehā party, and for people who are not going to entrench the Māori seats, not going to make Te Reo Māori compulsory, not going to stop oil drilling and mining, for all of the words that the Labour Party Māori MPs have said about having 12 Māori MPs in a Labour Party. What a waste of time if they're not going to advocate for Māori rights and Māori issues. Get out of the seat if you're not going to do that, and give it to the independent voice of Māoridom, who is the Maori Party and the Mana Party, so that we can uphold and fight for the rights of our people as we have done for the entire time that we've been there. That's what's important for Māori right now.
Marama, officially there were 600 suicides last year. Critics say our real numbers could actually be 3 times higher than that. First question, why are so many New Zealanders killing themselves? And second question, what are the Māori Party going to do about that?
Well, the Māori Party recognise that it is Māori youth who lead the world in the numbers of suicide. This is definitely an issue that Māori need to tackle. And secondly, what the Māori Party have done about that already is that we have secured money for suicide prevention and put it straight in the hands of Māori providers at the grassroots. It had 3 criteria, Martyn. First one was that it had to be youth-led, youth voice. Second one, underpinned by kaupapa Māori models of practice, because that's what actually resonates with Māori youth. And thirdly, our takatapui whānau have told us there is no support for them as youth. They've got nowhere to go. But lastly, I want to say this, that if we only ever report the disparity, if we only ever report the unwellness and never tell people about how we've reached parity for doctors, Māori doctors coming out, have the highest rates of Māori PhDs right now, highest rates ever of achieving NCA level 2, of undergrad degrees, and all the good things we do, like $50 billion of Māori business aiding to this economy and the good stories, then they believe the rubbish that is put across mainstream media, like that we're all the highest rates of imprisonment, so on and so on. But that's 5,000 people. There are 800,000 Māori. We're talking about less than 1%. And if they only ever hear the bad and the ugly, then they believe that being Māori is a deficit to them and not an asset.
Good point. What is the biggest issue in health right now, and what will the Māori Party do about it?
I believe the biggest issue in health is actually our mental health system. Our mental health system is wrecked and ruined. There is not enough rehabilitation in our system for people who suffer from mental health issues. If we put $1 billion into rehabilitation instead of prisons, then we would close prisons. We would keep people out of prisons, because the majority of people in there have underlying issues around PTSD, around sexual abuse, around mental health disorders. We need rehabilitation to be the focus and not incarceration.
What is the biggest issue in education right now?
I believe the biggest issue in education for Māori is, and for Māoridom, and for the whole of Aotearoa, is not having Te Reo Māori compulsory in schools. Absolutely number one top issue, because if you look at the people who vote Māori Party, the majority of them speak Māori. 26% in Waiariki said that they would vote for the Māori Party. 26% of people in Waiariki speak Te Reo Māori, because they understand Mātauranga Māori. They understand the greatness of our people and not the greed as being portrayed across mainstream media. And if every Māori child at least had the opportunity to learn our language, their birthright, they would start to open the Māori world to their eyes that tells them actually we were born of greatness, that our people were amazing, that they are resilient and strong, and they are benefit added to this nation, not a deficit to be mocked and to be pointed out as being at the bottom of every disparaging statistic. You make Te Reo Māori compulsory in education in every school in this nation, it adds benefit to our knowledge. We share our language, and it is the window to the Māori world, and it grows understanding and reduces institutionalized racism, which is the bane of corrections, the bane of education, the bane of health, the bane of mental health, the bane of SIFs, and that pipeline of incarceration from SIFs to gang membership to incarceration and abuse. Make Te Reo Māori compulsory in schools, and we will overcome so many of those disparaging statistics.
I really need to support your words there. My 7-year-old daughter is in a bilingual class, and the joy,
loves it.
The joy she has in being able to speak Te Reo and the pride that I feel, it is a magical connection. Let me move on. What is the biggest issue in the economy right now, and how is the Maori Party going to solve that?
It's the disparity of the trickle-down theory that if a rising tide lifts all boats, as the National Party will tell you, but not if your boat is full of holes and anchored to the bottom of the ocean. The growing gap between those that have and those that have not is far too huge. We must force the money down by innovative taxation, not tax everything, but innovative models of taxation, like removing GST on healthy kai, on primary produce food, like removing GST, as they have done in England, on health and education. It can be done. We just need a government that's willing to do it.
What are the biggest issues in our society and culture right now, Marama?
In culture, it's understanding and recognising that culture is value add to every person, that we don't have to be all in a melting pot, because it is preposterous to think that Māori should aspire to be poor Pākehā by becoming assimilated. Now, that's not my quote. That was Sir James Henari's quote from years ago. And we know that that is true. Celebrate the diversity of the cultures in our nation, and we will be united as a nation rather than fighting over whether an immigrant adds value or not, or whether Māori culture adds value or not. All culture adds value to a person, and if you understand another person's culture, it adds value to you and this nation.
Thank you, Marama. You have 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote Maori Party this election?
Māori Party are going to be the kingmakers in this election, and you can have the opportunity to help the Māori Party make the right decision by voting for the Māori Party. We don't need 12 Māori members of a Pākehā British Labour Party that tells us when to jump, how high to jump, and whether or not we want to vote for something, because it's easy. If it comes down to what's right for Māori or what's popular for this nation, Māori will be thrown under the bus no matter who drives it.
Kia ora, Marama. Good luck for the election.
Thank you, Bradbury. See you later, mate.
All right. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, to our next person online, Ian Lees-Galloway, spokesperson for the Labour Party. Kia ora, Ian. How are you?
Good, mate. How are you?
I'm very, very well. Is it all the camera all working there?
Hopefully. Just 1 second, caller.
That's okay.
Yeah, the host keeps asking me to start it, and I keep trying to start it.
There you go. Well,
there we go. How's that?
There we go. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Ian, your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is important starts now.
Well, look, the thing is that this election, people have got a really clear choice. We've got some really big issues that need to be addressed, haven't been addressed for the last 9 years. Housing, health, education, the environment, community safety. And you've got a choice between a government that believes in a market approach, hands-off, not really getting involved, and an alternative government that is sitting ready to go, that believes in having a hands-on approach to actually taking action on all of those things. It'll be a very close election. We all know how close it's going to be. So every vote is going to count, but we have some critical issues, climate change, fresh water, housing, that we really have to decide at this election, where are we going with those things in the future? Because if we don't start to take action now, it's going to be very, very difficult to rectify those issues in the future.
Ian, there are 41,000 homeless in New Zealand, with 1,600 dying each year from the cold, tens of thousands more living in overcrowded conditions, and hundreds of thousands just locked out of home ownership. What the bloody hell is Labour going to do about that?
Well, we've got a very, very comprehensive housing plan. There's lots of different aspects to it. But look, the central piece has got to be building houses. We have far too few houses in New Zealand. We've not kept up with population growth. We need to build state houses for people to be able to rent. We need to build affordable houses for people to be able to buy. We need to sort out the emergency accommodation situation as well. There's a whole lot we have to do around affordability, but most importantly, we need houses. And that requires a government to actually roll up its sleeves and do the work. Of course, we're going to partner with the private sector, but there's only one outfit in New Zealand that has the resources to actually build the number of houses we need, and that is government. And that's why we need a progressive centre-left government that is actually prepared to take responsibility for this and get on with the job.
Officially, there were 600 suicides last year. Critics say our real number could be 3 times higher than that official figure. Ian, why? Why are New Zealanders killing themselves in the numbers they are? And what's Labour going to do about it?
So I think on one hand, you've got all the issues that go with inequality. You've got issues of people feeling completely disconnected and dislocated from the community around them. They haven't got the support networks that they used to have around them because we have just become a more individualistic society that cuts people off. But also we haven't got the mental health services that we need to support people. When people actually identify as having a mental illness or needing support, the support is not there. People have to wait weeks or months before they can get the help that they actually need. So we need to look at the societal structural issues around inequality, around the sort of drive towards individualism, the fact that we're not as connected as a community as we used to be. Yeah. But we also have to make sure that our mental health services are provided with the resources they need to be able to respond, so that when people, especially young people, identify as having a need, we can help them straight away.
There are over 10,000 New Zealanders in prison, tens of thousands more on electronic bail. Double bunking has seen more prison rapes. Private prisons have seen total breakdown of order, and the lack of genuine rehabilitation means you've got prisoners released more damaged than when they went in. I know how deceptively seductive political rhetoric of get tough on prison crap is, but at some point these people have to live back with us in our community. What are we going to do about the clusterfuck that our prison system has become?
Well, look, in the long run, we actually would like to see the prison population come down. We think there are people who are sent to prison who shouldn't be. There are better ways of dealing with some crimes than just sending people to prison. And we all know that a lot of people go into prison as a result of low-level crimes, and they come into contact with some pretty bad news people, and they come out in a worse situation they went in. So a smarter use of our justice system, more use of restorative justice. And you're absolutely right. We need to make sure that when people are incarcerated, that we have proper programs around them to rehabilitate them. We know that people who go into prison overwhelmingly have mental health problems, have problems, and have not had educational success, so they don't have great literacy or numeracy. They have drug and addiction problems. Yep. We need to be doing a much, much better job around helping people to deal with those issues, deal with what drove them into prison in the first place, so that when they come back out, they can integrate back into society. But actually, funnily enough, here's another place where housing comes up, because when people come out of prison, we don't have the supported accommodation, we don't have the availability of the accommodation that they need to be able to have a base back in their community to start that process of integration again. So all of these things link together. And this is where we actually need a government that recognises that everything is interconnected, recognises the need to link all these things together, and make sure that we're actually, we are taking a hands-on approach to supporting people who need it.
Nothing seems to sum up the National Party's last 9 years in power quite as beautifully as Auckland having a tiny pipeline cut by a bunch of people who were logging for kauri logs in an almost unregulated market, and no one knows who bloody well did it. Why do we have such shitty infrastructure, and why can't we be adults and think a little bit ahead? Why is that so impossible in this country?
Well, because infrastructure costs money, and to get money, you have to be prepared, to tax people appropriately, to have a fair tax system that raises the revenue that you need to be able to invest in the infrastructure that you need. And
can Labor
we've had
do
9
that?
years of a government which has handpicked its infrastructure for political purposes. You can't see a pipeline under the ground. So as far as National is concerned, there's no votes in it. You can see bloody big highways. So they've built plenty of them, but they haven't actually taken care of our fundamental infrastructure. And I would include in that houses, decent health system, decent electricity systems that means that industry is able to grow and don't have power shortages, which certainly happening in my electorate. We actually have to take, as you say, we have to invest in the future and not just see infrastructure as a vote-grabbing exercise.
And can Labor do that? That's the question. Can you guys do that?
Oh, I believe we can. I think we've had a good track record of investing in the kind of infrastructure that we need in the past. And I absolutely believe that we can. We are committed to being a community-focused government that uses the resources of our whole community to make sure that we provide for our whole community.
Thank you, Ian. You've got 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote for the Labor Party this election?
Look, this election is going to be dead close. And if you want a change of government, you have to give the major party of opposition the mandate it needs to form the next government. That means give your party vote to Labor so that we can be the strong core of an alternative government. We need that mandate. It is going to be a dead heat between us and National. We need to be ahead of National to be able to legitimately say to the public of New Zealand, we can form the next government. If you want change, real change, party vote Labor.
Thank you so much, Ian. Good luck for the election, my friend. Coming up now, ladies and gentlemen, we have Susie Dawson, the spokesperson for the Internet Party. Kia ora, Susie. How are you?
Kia ora, Martyn. Thank you so much for having me on.
Calling all the way from Russia, I believe.
That's true.
Excellent. Your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is important starts now.
The Internet Party wants to update New Zealand. That's what it comes down to. So we have an antiquated political system with really restrictive conditions. We have a parliament that mostly sits empty on Parliament TV. It's just empty benches. You've got to wonder what these guys are actually up to. We have what I call a political degree to Parliament pipeline, where there's an expectation that only a certain class of people with a certain background can even have access to become an MP. The Internet Party believes that real people have the smarts and the lived experience to meaningfully contribute to the future of our country. We believe that our political system must be updated. And we believe that we have to really look hard at what's happening in New Zealand and the relationship to the rest of the world, because poverty and privatisation and water and all of these issues are uniform across the entire Western world. It is not just New Zealand that is suffering this globalist agenda, and the Internet Party wants to address that root cause of these issues.
What do you think is the biggest domestic issue for New Zealand right now?
Well, coming into this election, being the Internet Party, we wanted to just roll out a bunch of tech initiatives, but we felt unable to do so because the conditions on the ground have deteriorated so significantly that we can't ignore the fact that people need to be housed and people need to be fed. And the Internet Party is the only party that has come up with policies to address this that don't cost any money. So our No More Empty Houses policy is where we've identified that property speculators are buying houses in bulk and then sitting on them until they can make money on them, leaving them empty. And that's constricting the rental market, so people can't even rent a property, let alone buy a property. So we developed a policy where we would take Wins, who has been paying $2,000 a week to put people in motels, and instead have them pay the $700 or $800 a week market rent to get those people into these empty houses. So obviously we are not going after the families that own 1 or 2 properties, but we're going after the property speculators who own 10 or 20 or 100 properties and telling them you can still sell your property when you want to with 30 days notice, but you can't sit on a house and leave it empty for months or years just until you make the money on it. You must make that house available at market rates to New Zealanders. And in doing so, that will bring the rental prices down for everyone. With our No More Hungry Kiwis bill, what we're wanting to do is to have the supermarkets ship their excess food stock directly to the city mission and to the food banks so that we can feed people off. I mean, millions of dollars of perfectly good food is just thrown into dumpsters, dumped in the tip every single day. There's no reason for that. So in France and in other countries around the world, this program has already been implemented where the supermarkets are not allowed to throw that stock away at the tip. They must ship it to the food banks. And that makes food accessible to all New Zealanders who need it.
What do you think the biggest issue in the economy is right now?
A complete lack of innovation. So on one hand, we're selling off all of our state assets, which is reducing our income. And then everybody wants to have a conversation about tax. Should we tax higher? How do we get more tax money? What do we do? We don't need to have the focus on collecting money from the citizenry who are already suffering economically. We need to have the focus on creating new income for our country. So step one is not to sell our state assets, because we all know what happens when we sell them. They get assets stripped. They get flogged off for pennies, and then eventually we end up having to buy them back anyway at far more money than we had sold them for in the first place. So the Internet Party innovates constantly. We are the party of technical know-how and new ideas. So we want to get into Bitcoin and the blockchain. We want to create new tech cooperatives in New Zealand where these new initiatives and companies are owned by New Zealanders, where New Zealanders both manage and are the shareholders of these companies. We think initiatives like Kiwi Bank were a bloody good idea. We want to see more of our critical infrastructure owned by New Zealand, not being sold off overseas. And we need to just make the money, not obsess over collecting the money.
Is climate change the biggest issue facing us as a species? What would the Internet Party do about it?
Of course it is. I mean, it's blatantly obvious with how many cyclones and hurricanes and earthquakes and God knows what happening everywhere. You can't ignore it. It's here, it's happening, and we have to do something about it. But we also can't ignore that the US military is responsible for 40% of the emissions worldwide, just as one entity. Yep. And this is when I talk about looking at the root causes of the issues, and that being in the international arena. The military and the wars are the driving factors behind climate change and behind so much devastation on this planet. And for too long, New Zealand has been colluding in those illegal wars. We have been sitting by silently while atrocities are committed in our name and with our involvement. And it's time that New Zealand remembers its heritage of standing up and saying, no, we're not going to be a part of this. No, we don't want to be a part of this. And taking that moral stand on the international stage.
What is the biggest international issue for New Zealand right now, do you think?
I think that New Zealanders need to understand that things like the GCSB bill are not just a New Zealand issue. There is the Aussie Data Retention Act, the UK IP Bill, the USA Freedom Act, the Canada C51 changes that are replications of the GCSB bill. The legislation that has been imposed in New Zealand has been imposed upon countries across the world. And that's why Internet Party has been working with whistleblowers, academics, even a Nobel Peace Prize nominee at our anti-spy bill events every week. If you go look up #anti-spy bill on Twitter, you'll see we've been delving into these issues: mass surveillance, biometric databases, the encroachments upon the privacy of citizens around the world. We need to understand it's an international global agenda that has been imposed upon us, and we need to band together with like-minded citizens across the world to take our privacy back.
Susie, you've got 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote for the Internet Party this election?
Because the Internet Party is brave, it is courageous, it is young. We are the future of politics. And we have a 20-year-old candidate, a 22-year-old candidate, a 24-year-old candidate that the media has not even let you know exists because they are afraid of our innovation. They are afraid of our ability to create our own narratives and not work within the confines of the establishment and of the media. The reason that you're not allowed to hear my voice on televised debate is because they are scared of what I have to say. They know it's the truth, they know it's significant, and they know it resonates with New Zealanders. That is why you must vote Internet Party. It is a conscience vote. We are not imploding in 2017 if we don't get in. In fact, we're not even concerned about the total votes for this election. We're concerned about movement building for 2020, for 2023, for 2026. We are here to stay, and we will fight for the big powers, the elites, and the issues that other parties are too scared to.
Susie, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. We are moving. Thank you. We are moving on to our next guest this evening, and I believe someone's going to patch me through. It's either going to be Tracy or Tracy Martin. Kia ora.
Hey, how are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Your 60-second opening statement as to why this election is so important starts now.
Well, this has been an election that I've never seen before. This is the closest election I've seen for a long, long time. And I really do think that there is an opportunity at this election to change the direction for New Zealand. And so from a New Zealand First perspective, we think that's vital. Where, so much has gone wrong with the neoliberal movement, and so much has affected our people. The standard of living for our people has fallen dramatically since the 1980s and the 1990s. And the reality is both the major parties participated in that. So again, from the New Zealand First perspective, this is an opportunity. We're coming to a tipping point. We have to stop. We have to catch up. We have to set a standard for our people, and we have to really adjust what we put value on.
There are 41,000 homeless in New Zealand, Tracy, with 1,600 dying each year from the cold, tens of thousands more living in overcrowded conditions, and hundreds of thousands locked out of home ownership. What will New Zealand First do about that? Right. So, first of all, we have to stop bringing in 72,000 people a year until we catch up. If we can't house our own now, how can we guarantee that we will be able to house those new people? And when you bring somebody to your country, you are obliged to make sure that they have a standard of living similar to your own citizens or better. Now, the second thing we have to do is we have to change the culture at Work and Income New Zealand. Just imagine if we decided as a country that we will set a standard of living and none of our citizens will fall below it. So when you walked into Work and Income New Zealand, the first question was, do you have somewhere to live? And if the answer is no, then we're going to sort that. If the second question is, do you have some food to put on the table? And if the answer is no, we're going to sort that. Rather than a meeting in an open forum where you put in all your terrible things that are happening in your life, and here's $200 and off you go. But downstream then, we need to make sure that, one, we have more social housing, but we also need to, my generation was one of the first generations that didn't have government support to get into a home. And because we had the universal family benefit, which you could capitalize on to get your first family home, we valued families and we supported them into a home. So New Zealand First is actually going to remove the cost of land for families for their first home. We're going to bring back something similar to the Housing Corporation so that there can be low interest 2% loans. And we're going to start building prefabricated houses onto government land, and we're going to value our families again. There were 600 suicides officially last year. Critics say that number could actually be 3 times higher than that. Why are New Zealanders hurting themselves in such outrageous numbers? And what would New Zealand First do about that, Tracy?
So this is coming up a lot, and thank goodness it's coming up a lot. What the first job I ever had when I was at what is now year 13 was I was a youth line counsellor. So a couple of things during that training was that you have a percentage of your community who says who treats suicide as something by which they'll be sad when I'm gone. so in some way, it's an immature way of dealing with it, but it turns out really badly for them, right? And then there's another side where all hope is gone. And I think we're dealing with a situation in what is a growing situation in our country, which is all hope is gone. So with regard to the 150 odd young people, a couple of things, and I take on board what Mike King has actually been saying. We have to separate mental health, which is bipolar and massive depression and other sort of things, from mild depression, suicidal thoughts on not a regular basis, but an every now and then basis, and anxiety, so that we can actually make our young people comfortable to tell somebody they're not feeling great. They're having these thoughts, because we need them to reach out. But we've had, my family and I have had 2 young people live underneath our house. Now that sounds a bit bad, but we have a room underneath our house. And one of them, for example, suffers from depression and anxiety. And he went to a psychiatrist, and he came back one day and he said, I got the best news I could possibly get. The psychiatrist said, I'm not mentally ill. Now that shocked me, and I didn't understand it till I talked to Mike King. What it is this young person was in a space that needed to be listened to. He needed to have support. He needed to have somebody walk alongside him and step through this particular part of his life. So we're going to up counsellors, lower the counsellor-student ratios in secondary schools. We're going to put counsellors into primary schools. We're going to up the workforce that is beyond the schools, so that when they call, somebody comes. And we're going to start looking at those programs with the peer-to-peer mediation. And we're going to start working on programs to actually have young people, a little bit like, I suppose, what John Kirwan's done for the older citizen, young people to say, this has crossed my mind, I'm really worried. And somebody say, it's not abnormal, let's come and talk about it, because, we care.
What's the biggest issue in the economy right now, Tracy?
I actually think it's the way we value what we do. So everybody's focused on GDP, and that's how we decide on our success, and so on and so forth. I've sat on so many political panels. This is probably the last one for this election for me. But I was on an arts political panel last night. Now, just imagine, people keep saying that, the arts don't make money, the arts don't do this, the arts don't do that, the creative sector. Just imagine if we turned this around and decided that if we actually listened to our human beings, listened to our citizens, what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you want to go forward and create an income stream from? And we supported them to do that. Would not GDP grow?
Yeah.
Would not, let's turn this conversation around. Other people are deciding how we make income streams and what success is. I think the biggest challenge for the New Zealand economy is to break away from that train of thought, to come back down to actually successful people make a successful country, and successful people are happy people. Successful people are people who are passionate about what they're doing, and they don't kill themselves. They go on and they commit to their communities, and they create income streams for them and their families.
Final question quickly. What is the biggest issue in health right now?
And I've heard many of you, mental health is a major one at the moment, right? Because what we're doing, and one of the first questions I asked when I went to Parliament in 2011, John Key had promised $62 million in the 2011 government.
That's right, yep.
And I actually asked written questions to Peter Dunn and to Tiriana Turia, because they were the ministers who were to deliver on that 62 million. And I asked what that had been spent on. It had been spent on one website. So, So mental health is a big thing, and the way we deal with mental health, which is that we need to actually have human to human, and we need rural and urban solutions, because they're completely different scenarios.
You're right.
But downstream in health, health is broken. I've got ACC cases in my office of young people in their 20s who need a recognised, say, back operation. They've got ACC approved doctors, and ACC says, well, I'm not going to pay. And the DHB says, well, I'm not going to pay. It's still taxpayers' money. What the hell is going on? This young person wants a life and would be a tax-paying individual if somebody just give them a bloody operation.
Thank you, Tracy. You have 30 seconds for your closing statement. Why should New Zealanders vote for New Zealand first this election? Your time starts now.
I want New Zealanders to actually put themselves first. I want them, every single New Zealander. I want every member of like my extended family, which is New Zealand Pākehā, New Zealand Chinese, New Zealand Māori, New Zealand Airaki, New Zealand Cook Islander. I want every New Zealander to say it's okay for us to put ourselves first for a moment. We need to get back on track. And to do that, we need to vote and say, we're going to put ourselves first just for a moment so we catch up, and then we can do more for others.
Tracy, good luck for the election. Thank you so much for taking time out tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Dale. Bye.
Hooray. Ladies and gentlemen, let's wrap the show now with our panel. Can we please bring back on Joe, Kerwin, and LaQuisha, if we have them? That was the event. Hello, kia ora, panel. How are you? Joe?
Good. How are you?
LaQuisha?
Hi.
Kerwin's coming in any second. Well, didn't we all learn something there? See, we could actually have a debate with most of the political parties in New Zealand and nobody ripped each other's throats out. Wasn't that nice?
To be fair, I'd like to point out this is partially because the format of the debate didn't actually allow for them to actually engage with each other, although I am slightly surprised, considering Martyn Fox's strong rhetoric about the, how did you put it, the Pākehā British Labour Party, immediately being followed up by Ian Lees-Galloway. I was expecting some bite back, but I guess they've decided to play a bit of bridge, so to speak, and therefore not engage with the Maori Party while they're trying to destroy them in the Maori seats. But having said that, one thing I'd like to actually seriously comment about is when it comes to the Maori Party, Martyn Fox led in by saying how strongly she thought Hone Harawa was going to do. It was unthinkable, even 3 years ago, the last cycle, for the Mana Party and the Maori Party to actually be working together, to be talking up their relationship, rather than literally, as you say, tearing each other's throats out. But having said that, I think one of the strong reasons why a lot of these parties aren't tearing into each other is because many of the ones who have talked to, especially the larger parties, I suppose, are so concentrated on their own survival that unless they're the Labour Party talking about the Maori Party in other forums, they don't have the oxygen to actually devote to attacking others.
Joe, what was your highlight?
My highlight was hearing from Susie Dawson about the commonalities across the Western world and the trajectories are all the same. And the no empty houses policy, which is utterly impressive to me.
I thought so too. LaQuisha, your thoughts? Who was the highlight?
Obviously, my highlight was always going to be Martyn Fox, ever since she gave me this delightful salute, which I like to use widely. She's the only person that said the word takatapui, which for people who need some help with their kupu means intimate partner of the same gender, and was making some reference to the high suicide rates there. Yeah. So probably suicide and clean water are like my two big issues. And actually, the other person who was talking some sense about suicide was Tracy Martyn, but I just don't get why she's nailed her colours to Winston Peters' Poe. I just don't get it. She just seems so rational, and Winston is so Winston.
Is this where I jump in to say there's a lot of rational people inside New Zealand first?
Thank you, Kerwin. Joe, what was a surprise for you this evening?
The surprise for me was when Tracy Martyn pointed out the distinction between people who are mentally ill as opposed to people who are just anxious and upset because of what they're going through in life at the moment.
Now, that's an absolutely false distinction as far as I'm concerned. Like, I understand the point she's making, and it's great if it helps destigmatize some people that actually go and seek help because they don't think that they're, seriously ill. But mental illness is very much a spectrum and a continuum, and there is a very real risk, even though I appreciate where she's coming from as on a pragmatic level, with simply saying, yep, there's serious mental illness over here, and there's, sort of just feeling a bit sort of upset over here.
LaQuisha, what do you think in terms of housing policy? What did you hear this evening that made you hopeful that you might be able to buy your own house?
Oh, girl, I'm never buying my own house. I'm renting till I die. I think we all
agree that, right? All of
again, probably surprisingly, Tracy Martyn talking about some real Muldoon era policies. But I mean, clearly what we're doing now is not working. I mean, you just have to look out the window to see how the current stuff's going. So I'm like, yeah, maybe give that a go and see how it flies. I was surprised that actually Labour were talking a lot about the problems, but their speaker, Ian, wasn't real clear on what their solutions were going to be. And I would have expected some more of that from him, I think. Yeah.
Joe, climate change, did we hear anything that makes you feel that we're going to be able to tackle it?
To be honest, no, I haven't actually heard anything from anyone tonight that makes me think we're going to tackle it.
Kerwin?
I think the intention's there, but there's nothing concrete. There's no specific details about anything that I've heard tonight that would lead me to believe there'd be any significant difference.
Yeah, see, that particular point about details, I think it's a general one which we can extend to quite a few of the parties which we've had on tonight. I mean, particularly to echo what LaQuisha said, I think we're having a bit of back and forth on Twitter as Ian Lees-Galloway was talking about this. When he was making those noises about reforming the prison system, I was going, yes, excellent noises. Now, where are the actual detailed policies? Because like they can talk about their Kiwi World policy with reckless abandon. That's wonderful. But when it comes to the prison reform stuff, we're left going, okay, they're selling us a big game. Where's the actual proof they're going to do something? Now, bring it to New Zealand first. Like, obviously, I'm in an interesting position when it comes to, potentially criticising that particular organisation. But when, Tracy got up and said stuff I absolutely agree with about, neoliberalism is not working. We need to do something different. Put ourselves first by voting New Zealand first. Wonderful rhetoric. The question is, where is the actual hard detail about what that party in particular is going to do differently as of next week to try and bring the neoliberal revolution to an end?
We're gonna wrap things very quickly. Final word from each of you. LaQuisha, your final thoughts for the election 2017.
I think that if you vote Labour, it's going to be just like neoliberalism with a bit more arts funding.
Which is good. Or better anyway.
Joe, final thoughts for the election 2017.
Get out and vote. You might not think that it makes a difference, but the reason why it doesn't make a difference might be because people like you have decided not to vote. So go and vote, and then tell people what it was like for you voting and encourage them to vote. I don't care who you vote for, just vote.
Thank you. Kerwin, your final thought 2017.
All right, there's two parts to this. The first part goes out to all our panelists this evening, and in fact, everybody else who runs
Thank you to everyone.
I think it's actually something, so there's more than 1,000 people who actually put their hands up to run for Parliament. I've done that once before myself. It's a strenuous experience, and even if you don't quite make it in, or you don't quite do something right in a particular debate, my hat goes off to you for putting yourself out there and putting yourself out there for a party. That's wonderful. But the second thing is, we're actually really spoiled for choice in this country. I'm very surprised about this. The number of parties who got out here tonight and said some positive things was absolutely remarkable. I'm kind of interested, though, in there seems to be two sorts of sides to me the parties have had. Two sorts of sides the parties have had tonight. The first side of those talking about we've got to be in government. We've got to, look at the real political implications of our political involvement. Yep, sure, fine, we get it, that's important. But there's another side to it, especially for some of the more minor parties, where they're talking about future planning, where they're talking about the next 5 years, next 10 years, next 20 years. It'd be absolutely great if we could actually have that as a broader part of our political conversation. I know a lot of voters probably wouldn't actually go for it, come to think of it, but because it seems like it's a new concept for many of our parties, and therefore it's underdeveloped. So I hope that next time around, it'll be a bit different.
Thank you so much, Kerwin. Thank you to everyone for watching and participating this evening. We wanted to do a public service style broadcast for you all so you could actually see what the political spectrum was, because nobody else has bloody well done this so far. Thank you for everyone for participating. Thank you for everyone for watching. Thank you for everyone helping make this bloody thing happen this evening. Tens of thousands have watched. We're pretty excited. Have a wonderful election. Don't forget to vote. Good night.